Hello, everyone. I'm Winnie, and I'm going to tell you something about game development with Vue.js or slash Nuxt.js, which is a wraparound Vue, and Phaser, which has this cute animation and doesn't have an official logo. I'm a front-end engineer at GitLab. Um, GitLab is, for those who don't know, one of the biggest player in the game industry. We build games like Weka Pipeline, where you click a red pipeline until it's final green. We also build a great racing game, which is called the entire DevOps cycle. But today I'm not going to tell you anything about GitLab, also not about the big load of open vacancies that we have. So I'm not going to tell you how awesome working at GitLab is. I'm going to tell you something about game development. And first question is, why do you do it like the way that I'm going to explain you today? And that has different aspects to it. First aspect, oh, I'm sorry. This doesn't work as expected. So switching go back to space. So why browser games at all? And personally, I see two main factors that drove me into browser games. Mainly, you can click and play. If you're going to join game jams, you can provide the link, and people don't have to install sketchy binaries on their gaming computers, or in general, they don't have to install anything. They can just open the URL, and hopefully it loads, and maybe they can play. Also, if you want to share it with your friends, you can just give them the URL, and you don't need to explain them how to compile C++ code or whatever. Also, a browser is a powerful platform. It brings a lot of things out of the fly, like text rendering and alignment. I didn't believe how complex that is when I started to try get text wrapped in a C++ game engine. Wrapped properly, that is, in different languages, have the text many lines, and yeah, I'm not going to dive into that. Also, it has predefined UI components. I mean, it has buttons, it has selects, it has things, headlines. You don't need to build them yourselves. Also, it has asset loading and caching built in. I mean, browsers cache things occasionally, and most of the time it's a good thing. Also, they are able to load files from random servers like Bitcoin miners and whatever. And you have developer tools. That is, you can debug your games inside the thing that you're running. I mean, many popular game engines bring their own developer tools, but this one is built into the game already. Additionally, which is a consequence of the share URLs, is it's a simple update mechanism that is for the people using your game, not necessarily for you. But people don't have to install a 2 GB update to run the newest version of your game. I'm going to continue why I have picked Phaser as a game engine. There's, I think, maybe 3.8 billion different game engines for web games. I just counted them yesterday. Also, I didn't try that many myself. Like, I think I tried 4 or 5. I'm quite happy with Phaser because it's free software. It's MIT licensed. I'm personally a big fan of free software. It has a couple of parsers renders for different file formats. That is, for example, it has tiled maps built in, so you don't need to build your tiled renderer yet again. I've been doing that a couple times, and it's not that fun after you did it a 7th time. Also, animated sprites are built in. That is, you can load your PNG with different frames of the same thing, and you just pass it to Phaser, and it renders it the way that you like to see it. Also, it has physics engines. It doesn't come with a simple. It comes with a simple physics engine, but also with some more sophisticated ones, and you can pick if you like performance or accuracy. And particle emitters, one of my favorite things that I've never used so far, but it looks fancy. And yeah, it's built in. It has 3D and 2D cameras. I've never done any 3D gaming with Phaser, but these 2D cameras are quite nice to use. Like there's a single method for following a character. You just do camera.follow character, and it follows the character. Surprisingly, also you can just build tints for different color on cameras, and they're quite nice to use. It has screens, that is animations on your game entities. Also, surprisingly, how difficult that is to combine with a game engine. At least it was for me. More of the higher level thing. It has a very detailed documentation. I wouldn't go so far that it is entirely a great documentation, but it has much detail, and they do their best to make it more navigable. So far, I found everything that I looked for in the documentation. Not everything was correct, but at least I found it. Also, it has a huge collection of examples provided by Phaser themselves. That is, you just realized I forgot to put the URL, but you'll probably find it yourself. There's lab.phaser.something, top-level domain, where you can try out things, and they even have a playground where you can modify the code to examples. So that's the reason behind Phaser. Now, I explained you all the stuff why Phaser is great. So why do we need something else on top of that? Why do we need Vue.js, for example? Vue.js allows you to collocate some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript within a single file component. Phaser.js uses just plain JavaScript, so it doesn't really force you into a clean structure. Also, the components can be reused at different places. For example, you may have menus, or you may have overlays in your game that you can use at different places. That works with JavaScript classes as well, but it's surprising how difficult it seems to people to accept that classes can be reused. So Vue forces you more into that. Also, it has a Vue router, which allows you to have different pages that you can navigate on, let's say the main menu and maybe the settings page and so on, and it handles passing parameters to the different routes. And the most important part that I'm going to focus on today is reactivity. That is, you can update different things based on the same data, maybe some sort of automatically. Then, to further extend on that, especially the reactivity part, why do you use Vuex? So Vuex is the official state management solution for Vue.js. So those of you who are more familiar with React, that's like Vuex for Vue is like Redux to React, I think you could say. It decouples the components that you use from each other. That is, if one component A needs to talk to component B, you don't need to pass an instance of component B to component A. Both can just talk to the store, and that makes it much easier to follow the logic and also to work in parallel on the same stuff. It allows you to have global application state. In general, I would say that's a flaw, but sometimes you need it. For example, the currently logged-in user would be one of the things that you want to have globally defined. And you definitely don't want to have one component that passes in the user to each child component, and the child components pass it on to their child components. And it makes it easy to test your business logic of the game without needing to render the game itself. So you can have a clear separation between what's the logic and what's the rendering. So next part would be, what can you do to combine those three things into a game? And I'm going to present you 4 different approaches that I came across during the past month that I've building games. The first one is put the game entities into the store. That means we define actions that are just functions inside the store, for those that are not familiar with Vuex. And those modify the game entities. The game entities need to be local variables in the store modules. I think I'm later explain why. And this has some clear disadvantages. For example, each method of Phaser that you're going to call needs to have a matching action that you can call from your components. And also, debug tools cannot access the entities that are wrapped in your local variables inside your store. Also, there's a strong coupling between the store and the Phaser entities because they are inside the store, while I was just explaining that it's nice to have a decoupling of the rendering and the logic. So how can we do better? One improvement is reactive game entities. That is, we override properties of your game entities with the store state. And then you have actions and mutations to update the store state, and they automatically update the game entity properties. And yeah, Phaser then picks up the change that happened to the properties on the game entities and renders correctly. Disadvantage of that approach is it only works for properties. I mean, you can do some hacks to make it work for methods, but Phaser has some methods that change derived data. For example, you can change the mass of an object, and then that change different other objects of that physical body that is attached to the game entity. And that's more difficult to build in this way. Also, it breaks if Phaser chooses to override a property later on. I've never come across a situation where that actually happened, but it's technically possible because Phaser doesn't know that you provide your own property on Phaser's object. Also, property changes that happen often may cause performance problems because you're constantly hitting the store. And from my experience, Vuex isn't actually built for a high amount of data changes. So next improvement would be store watches. That is, we build the game entities in isolation from the store and then register watches on the store state or on the derived store state in the game entities initialization and then couple them with the actions that should happen on the entities. Disadvantage of that is it's potentially more verbose because of the glue code that you need to write between Phaser and Vuex. Personally, I'd say that's also an advantage, actually, because more verbose means more people understand what's going on without needing to know about the magic that happens in the background. But you can see it either way, I guess. Also, it's more difficult to find all places that depend on the store state. That's a general problem with having state management, in my opinion, or having Vuex as a state management at least. It's easy to go in one direction. If you look at the game entity and see that it watches, let's say, the color state, it's easy to see to go to the color state in the store. But it's not easy to go the other way around. If you have the color state, it's not easy to see which things depend on that. I mean, you can search for color in your code base, but that's probably not the best approach. This approach also has one additional disadvantage that comes from the fact that store watches are only triggered if the state actually changes. That is, you cannot trigger things on Phaser if things don't change. And later I'm going to show you an example where this is relevant. One thing that you can think of is playing a sound for an action. If a user clicks a button and you want to play the sound every time the button is clicked, you cannot build this into a store, into a reactive variable, because the sound that you're going to play is the same each time the button is clicked. So to solve that problem, I got you the last approach that I'm going to present. That's the subscribed action approach. You can have listeners on the store that are called whenever a certain action is dispatched. Actually, they are called for every action that's dispatched, but you can then filter out the actions that you're interested in. And this even triggers if the state is not changed by the action itself. Disadvantage, again, it's hard to follow how the data flow happens, because if you have, let's say, 20 or 30 things that listen to actions that happen, this means you have to look into each of the listeners to find out the combined logic of all of them. So after all that theory, let's look at some code. So how can you build all these things? And let's see if that works. So you in the back, can you wave if you can read that? Awesome, thank you. So first approach that I showed you was the using Phaser entities in the store. Sorry, wrong file. Let me open this one. So this is my store definition, my Vuex store definition, and the so I'm building a circle here, and that circle is then colored by an action that I named setColor. And yeah, there's a Phaser game instance that I created here and destroyed later on. So we are exposing 3 actions from the store, which is initialize game, destroy game, and setColor. And also you can see here are the local variables where I store the game instance and the circle instance. The reason why we cannot put them into the store state is what I'm going to explain in a bit. So this is the store side of the thing, and the component side of the thing is this. So we have an input here which defines the color, and we initialize the game with our root element, and then we have we map the action setColor in here, which is then called as soon as input is changed. And let me show you how that code looks in production. As soon as I get out my full screen mode. So this is the same thing. I have got my native HTML element color picker here, and if I change the color, that circle color is changed, and that circle color, so that entire gray thing here is actually rendered by Phaser using a canvas element, which I believe I can quickly show. So, no, I can't. Maybe I can. So you see why I have that overlay thing over here with the color picker element, and I have that huge color canvas thing created by Phaser. So I now have data binding between that color picker and my game entity. Also, if I go into the Vuex store in my DevTools, I see nothing, because nothing in the state is actually changed. And that's one additional disadvantage of the put entities in store. So next approach that I explained to you was the reactive game entities. And for those, this is how my store looks like. So I have my state with a position, just X and Y, and I have mutation and an action to set the position. So it's fairly simple. And I have, additionally to that store definition, I also have my entity, or my Phaser initialization stuff. That's this file, where I still create my new Phaser instance down here, and I'm also passing in my store instance into that initialization function, and then loop over my properties X and Y of my of the where is it? Oh, square. Here it is. So I'm defining properties on my square with the name X and Y, and set them create a getter to get the position actually from the store. So this wires my store state to the game entity, and this is how it looks like. I have 2 things here that move the coordinates, and those 2 things here on top, again, are native HTML elements, and the square is rendered by Phaser on the canvas thing. And this time, I can actually open up my Vuex debugger tools and see all these set position things that happened. So I can actually track each of the things that happened here. And yeah, look into the state and the current position if I want. So that was the reactive entities approach. The next one that I presented you was the store watches, where I have Phaser completely decoupled from the store. And this one looks like this. So I have my add circle action here, which creates a new circle in my store state. So we have a circle state in my Vuex store here, which is initially an empty array, and I add new circles in my add circles action. And I also have a move circles actions here, which moves the circles around and defines new coordinate to them. They are pretty random. And the wiring of the game entities looks like this. So I have whenever my main scene is created, I create a render circle function that builds all these circles. And if I check here if that circle already exists, and if it exists, I create a tween to the new position. And if it does not exist, I create a new circle thing. And then here happens the wiring. That is, I define a store watcher down here, which looks for my state of the store watches and looks into the circles array that I showed you. And whenever that circles array changes, it loops over that thing and calls the render circle function. Also, yeah, I'm going to unwatch my thing as soon as my phaser is destroyed. And the application behind that looks like this. So I have my add circle function wired to this button, can create new purple circles. And I have my move circles action wired to this button. So whenever the coordinates of my existing circles changes, the store state of my circles arrays changes, and Phaser makes a tween to the new position. Last approach that I showed you was the subscribed action approach. And for that, my store looks very similar. I have a select shape action here, which can just accept a string, and that initially is just not unset. The wiring for that looks like this. I create a circle and a square up here. I still have my watches from a previous approach where I set the color of the shape that is selected to the selected color, and of all the other shapes, which is 1, to the default color. And additional to the previous approach, I also have subscribed actions down here, which looks if my action is triggered. It creates a tween that lets the shape jump, basically. So I made a jump tween here. And this is how it looks like. So we have a select circle, a select square button here. Both are initially not selected, so they have the default color. And as soon as I select one, it gets the selected color and does not jump. Yeah. Maybe it's out of energy today. It needs another coffee. Not sure. Yeah. So you can see it jumping, wiggling, whatever. It's supposed to be bigger. Maybe the screen has the wrong size. I don't know. It's fully reactive, so not for resizing, but for initial. Yeah. So it's jumping out. So the jump height depends on the browser window size. So I believe it tested it on the wrong size. And yeah, that's it for my very live demo. And going back to the slides. So why is it confused caret back? Also, please see the double Y. So why not wrapper components? I'm rendering things here. Why not put all the game entities into components? And there's a few problems here with Vue in particular. I'm not sure if other frameworks solve that differently. One is Vue has a one-way data flow. That is, whenever you want to pass something down to child components, it needs to be a reactive prop. And making Phaser objects reactive is typically a bad idea because Phaser objects are doubly linked. That is, every scene knows all its children, and every children knows its scene. And that means Vue recurses happily into that thing, and then after a while realizes, oh, that's too many objects. And there's a workaround to that. Not quite sure if I have it on a slide. So you can freeze an object, but then it's frozen and cannot be changed anymore. So you cannot update the position anymore, and so on. Also, so even if that problem didn't exist, some objects are updated quite often. So, for example, if you have physics engines or tweens, the position changes quite often. So that can lead to performance problems if you pass them down as reactive props. Yeah, here it is. So if you use object freeze, I think that's the official workaround. If you don't want to have things reactive in Vue, you object freeze the thing, and then Vue is not going to look into that. But yeah, like I said, you cannot update the X and Y composition of your Phaser entity anymore after it's frozen. And yeah, that's not going to work. Also, another aspect to that, you cannot use wrapper components because Vue components need a single root element, and Phaser renders to a canvas. So it doesn't have a single root HTML element because it's a canvas thing. There's a workaround. You can create a HTML comment instead as a root element for your Vue component, but that does not allow child components because you cannot have child components in your HTML comment. There's another workaround, a lot of diffs. So you can create components that wrap your Phaser entities, and then you have diffs that have no purpose. That's possible, but yeah, I don't find it that nice. So can you use that approach or these approaches for all games? I would say avoid store actions if data changes often. Like, for example, for physics, because for me, it doesn't seem like Vuex is meant to be used for highly changed data. Possible workarounds for that is you can debounce if you are not relying on things to be rendered that often. You can use tile-based movement. That is, you don't have pixel perfect coordinates, but like only track the tiles that your entities are on. You can also use collision events of that Phaser provides you. That is, as soon as your thing that moves pixel perfect hits a thing, that triggers an action in your store. So these are the possible workarounds. I'd say a good fit for these approaches are adventure games or point-and-click adventures or puzzle games where you don't have that many data changes in a short amount of time. Still okay are jump and run. They typically don't have that many changes of things. I mean, you have a thing that moves around, but apart from that, you typically have a low amount of events. Bad fit, for example, would be a first-person shooter where you have a lot of 3D data and a lot of collision data, and racing games where you have 2D collisions a lot. I provided you a few links. They are mainly for afterwards if you look at the slides again. So I have 2 real-world examples. These are game jam entries that I made with a couple of friends, which use Vuex with Phaser in combination. Also put you the link to the slides in case you cannot read it up here, and the link to the examples that I showed you. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Yeah, any questions? No questions. Everything clear. One question.
Hi, thank you. It was a very good one. Really enjoyed it. One question about, you said that you wouldn't like wrapper components. Can you explain what you mean by wrapper components?
Yeah, sure. So it would be possible to have a component that initializes, for example, the circle or the square that I showed you, so that you have a Vue component, which typically just contains, let me show you an example. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Vue, so this is how a Vue component, Vue single file component looks like. So you have the template, and you have a script that's the logic of the component. And it would be possible that as soon as the component is created, you also create your Phaser entity in there, and then store the entity in the component. And the component is also responsible for destroying the game entity, or the game entity later on.
So you're practically using Vue and Vuex just to hold the state, and you let Phaser do the rest of the work?
Basically, yes. In the games that we have created, we did a mixture of both. So we had some elements in the game that were pure HTML elements. For example, for the overlays, we used pure HTML. And then, for the in-game rendering, we only used Phaser. For, I believe for one of the links that I've provided here, we even, for the between light and shadow game, we even mixed the rendering of the things. Like we have a thing that shows your health, the character's health, and that was HTML elements that just looked like they were rendered in the canvas.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I've got a question about RPGs. Do you have any experience with that? Because typically you've got kind of a world scene and a battle scene, and you want to transport the party state between them. So would that be a good idea to do this via the store? Or?
I'm going to show you maybe this example, depending on the Wi-Fi. Otherwise, I would suggest you check this out. Maybe. I see a lot of loading spinners. So this is a game that we built, and it's an Zelda-like, old Zelda-like adventure thing. So this type of thing works pretty well, in my opinion.
Yeah. What I meant were like turn-based RPGs.
Oh, I see.
And
I see.
You've got the world state and the battle state, and you want
I think that works quite well. Like,
okay, good.
Like battles in Pokemon, for example.
Yeah,
I think that works pretty well. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
By the way, in this game, we also had a rock paper scissors battle system, and that was also implemented in Phaser and Vuex. Any more questions? Otherwise, thank you everybody for coming by.